Someone you love has just died. In your world, there is a machine for this. There is a funeral home that collects the body within hours. There is a director who handles the paperwork, a florist who handles the flowers, a chapel that handles the crowd, and a grief counselor with a business card who handles you. The whole thing is managed, scheduled, softened, and kept at a careful professional distance. Now, remove all of that. Remove the funeral home, remove the counselor, remove the schedule. You are standing over the body of your child on a cold plain 40,000 years ago, and no one is coming to take it away. So what do? There is no protocol. There is no religion in the organized sense we would recognize. There is no institution that has thought about this before you and left you instructions. There is just the body, the cold, the rest of the group watching, and a feeling in your chest that you have no word for yet, because language itself is still young. This is the question almost nobody asks about our ancestors. We ask how they hunted, how they fought, how they survived the winters. We rarely ask how they mourned, and the answer turns out to be far stranger and far older than you would expect. Here's the assumption most people carry, whether they say it out loud or not. Grief, real grief, the kind that hollows you out and follows you for years, feels like a modern luxury. The thinking goes something like this. Ancient life was short, brutal, and saturated with death. Children died constantly. Adults rarely reached 40. Death was so common, so routine, so woven into every ordinary week, that people simply couldn't afford to feel it the way we do. They must have been numb, hardened, too busy surviving to sit and weep over a loss that the very next season would repeat. It is a tidy theory. It is also almost certainly wrong, because grief is not a cultural invention that arrived with poetry and funerals and time to spare. Grief is a biological event. It is older than agriculture, older than cities, older than our species. And the evidence for that doesn't come from ancient texts, because there aren't any. It comes from something far harder to argue with. It comes from your brain, from the graves in the ground, and from watching other animals do the exact same thing we do when the thing they love stops moving. Start with your brain, because this is where grief actually lives. When you form a close bond with another person, your brain does something very specific. It builds a model of them. It learns to predict where they will be, how they will react, what they will say, and it wires the expectation of their presence directly into your daily functioning. Neuroscientists who study bereavement describe love, in mechanical terms, as your brain encoding another person as part of your own map of the world. They become a fixed landmark. Your nervous system quietly assumes they will always be there. And this is why grief feels the way it does. When that person dies, the map does not update instantly. Your brain keeps predicting them. It keeps expecting them in the doorway, in the empty half of the bed, at the other end of the fire. The reason grief feels like disbelief, like a mistake, like your mind refusing to accept a fact you already know is true, is that your brain is running on old information and correcting it one painful collision at a time. This is not culture. This is not modern sensitivity. This is a prediction error, playing out in a piece of hardware that is essentially identical to the hardware inside every human who has ever lived. And that is the crucial point. The ancient human standing over their dead child had the same attachment circuitry you have, the same oxytocin, the same bonding system, the same brain that builds a model of the people it loves and then refuses to let go of it. If anything, the bonds were tighter. In a small band of 30 or 40 people, every single relationship was face-to-face, lifelong, and irreplaceable. There was no crowd to disappear into. There was no replacing a person with a stranger. The loss of one individual tore a permanent visible hole in a group small enough that everyone felt the edges of it. So if the biology was there, we should expect to find it in the ground. And we do. The oldest evidence that humans treated death as something more than disposal is genuinely staggering in its age. At Cima de los Huesos, a cave in northern Spain, researchers found the remains of at least 28 individuals deliberately placed deep inside a vertical shaft. These were not people who fell in. They were carried or dropped into a specific place again and again over a very long time. And the beings who did this were not even Homo sapiens. They lived around 400,000 years ago. Sit with that number for a moment. 400,000 years ago, long before our species existed, some form of ancient human was taking the trouble to carry their dead to a chosen place rather than leaving them where they fell. Now, we have to be careful here, because archaeologists argue fiercely about what that behavior actually means. It might be practical. Removing bodies from a living space prevents disease and keeps predators away. That is a perfectly reasonable, unsentimental explanation. An honest scientist will tell you we cannot read the emotions of a creature from a pile of bones. Then you reach the graves where the practical explanation runs out of room. Because at some point, ancient humans stopped simply putting bodies away and started putting things with them. And the moment a grave contains objects, the sanitation argument collapses. You do not need to bury a spear to prevent disease. You do not need to place flowers or shells or a necklace or a child's toys beside a corpse to keep predators away. The instant a burial contains a gift, someone was thinking about the dead as more than a hazard to be managed. They were thinking about them as someone. Consider the burial at Songhir, in Russia, dating to roughly 34,000 years ago. 2 children were laid head-to-head in a single grave and covered with something extraordinary. More than 10,000 ivory beads, each one carved by hand from mammoth tusk. Experimental archaeologists have estimated that a single bead took around an hour to produce. Do the arithmetic. 10,000 beads is thousands of hours of skilled labor, poured into the ground, onto the bodies of 2 dead children, by a community that had no time to waste and no calories to spare. That is the part that should stop you. These were not people with surplus. Every hour spent carving a bead was an hour not spent hunting, not spent gathering, not spent making tools that the living urgently needed. A society running that close to the edge does not spend thousands of hours decorating the dead unless the dead genuinely mattered to them. You do not grieve efficiently. You do not perform an economically rational funeral. The sheer, staggering wastefulness of that grave is not evidence of primitive confusion. It is evidence of love, measured in the only currency they had, which was time and effort and hunger. And this behavior is not confined to one lucky site or one clever group. It shows up across the ancient world, in wildly different places, among people who never met and could never have shared a custom. Bodies deliberately positioned, curled as if sleeping, or laid out with care. Corpses coated in red ochre, that deep rusty pigment that appears in grave after grave, across continents and across tens of thousands of years, so consistently that it clearly meant something, even if we can no longer read exactly what. When a behavior appears independently everywhere humans go, you are no longer looking at a local tradition. You are looking at something built into the species. But here is where it gets genuinely humbling, and where the idea that grief is somehow uniquely, specially human, starts to fall apart entirely. Because we are not the only creatures who do this. Elephants will stop at the bones of a dead herd member, sometimes years after the death, and touch the skull and tusks gently with their trunks, returning to the spot again and again. They show no such interest in the bones of other animals. They appear to recognize their own dead specifically, and to be drawn back to them. Mother chimpanzees have been documented carrying their dead infants for days, sometimes weeks, grooming a body that is no longer alive, refusing to set it down long after any practical hope is gone. Orcas have been seen pushing a dead calf through the water for over 2 weeks, holding a body afloat that will never breathe again. Magpies have been observed gathering around a dead companion. These are not human customs borrowed by animals. These are the raw, biological roots of grief, showing up in every species that forms strong social bonds, because that is the cost of forming them in the first place. This is the reframe. Grief is not the price of being sophisticated. Grief is the price of being attached. It is the unavoidable flip side of love, the bill that comes due for the enormous survival advantage of caring about other members of your group. A creature that bonds deeply enough to protect, feed, and cooperate with others is, by absolute necessity, a creature that will suffer when those others die. You cannot have one without the other. The very same wiring that keeps a social species alive is the wiring that guarantees it will mourn. So the ancient human standing over their child was not numb. That comforting myth, that they must have hardened themselves against a world full of death, does not survive contact with the evidence. If anything, constant exposure to death did not dull the feeling. It forced them to build something around it. And this is the part that separates us from the elephants and the chimpanzees. We did not just feel grief. We started to manage it. Together, out loud, with ritual. And ritual is where the human story of mourning truly begins. Think about what a funeral actually does, stripped down to its mechanics. It gathers the group in one place at one time. It forces everyone to look directly at the fact of the death, to see the body, to acknowledge that this person is gone and is not coming back. It gives people something to do with their hands and their bodies at the exact moment when the loss feels most unbearable and most abstract. And crucially, it does this collectively, so that no single person carries the weight alone. A ritual is, in a very real sense, a technology for updating the map inside your head. Remember the prediction error, the brain that keeps expecting a person who is no longer there. A funeral attacks that error directly. By making the community witness the death as a shared, undeniable public fact, it accelerates the brutal process of teaching every brain in the group that the map has to change. This is why cultures that have never met each other independently invented the same core ingredients. Gather, view the body, mark it, do something irreversible, like burial or burning, then mark the ground so the dead have a place. These steps are not arbitrary. They are what a social brain needs to let go. And there may be an even deeper function hiding inside all of this. When you place beads on a child, or paint a body in red ochre, or return to a grave to leave an offering, you are doing something no other animal appears to do. You are treating the dead as though they still exist in some form. Whether that belief took the shape of ancestors, or spirits, or an afterlife, we cannot know from bones alone. But the behavior is unmistakable, and it is old. Long before any written religion, humans were already acting as if death were not a full and final ending. And you can read that two ways. The cynical reading is that it is denial, a comforting story humans tell themselves to soften a truth too heavy to hold. But there is another reading, and I think it is the more honest one. The idea that the dead persist may be the natural output of a brain that literally cannot stop modeling the people it loved. Your brain built that person. It cannot simply delete them. So it keeps them in memory, in ritual, in the sense that they are still somehow with you. Ancient humans did not invent the afterlife out of nowhere. They may have been describing, as best they could, what grief actually feels like from the inside. So let's go back to the plane, 40,000 years ago, to the person we left standing over the body of their child. We now know a great deal more about them than we did at the start. We know their brain was building and breaking the same predictions yours does. We know they were not numb, because the graves they left behind are drenched in effort they could barely afford. We know they were not alone, because grief in humans was never a private event. And we know they were doing something no elephant and no chimpanzee ever managed. They were turning a feeling into a right. And that is the thread that connects them directly to you. When you stand at a graveside today, when you gather with family in a quiet room, when you find yourself unable to throw away a dead person's belongings, when you catch yourself still expecting them in the doorway months later, you are not performing a modern ceremony invented by modern people. You are running a program that is at least 40,000 years old and probably far older. The clothes have changed, the buildings have changed, the words have changed, the grief has not. So the next time someone tells you that ancient humans must have been too hardened, too surrounded by death, too busy surviving to truly mourn, you will know that they have it exactly backwards. Grief is not the fragile invention of comfortable modern people with time on their hands. Grief is one of the oldest and most human things there is. Older than farming, older than language, older than our species itself. It is the shadow that love has always cast. And our ancestors did not run from that shadow. They learned, slowly and painfully and together, how to live inside it. You want to go deeper into the hidden emotional lives of our ancestors, how they loved, how they feared, how they made sense of a world that had no explanations yet. That is exactly what my full course is built for. It takes everything you saw in this video and follows it all the way down. The link is in the description. Because understanding how the first humans handled the hardest parts of being alive tells you something remarkable about the parts you are handling right now.